My name is Chris Huffman. I'm the 2021 Northeast Chapter IFMA President. I would like to thank Patty Hendrickson, Jenna Jordan, Lois Peterson, and Kurt Byler for all the behind-the-scenes planning and work that went into this event. We also want to thank Madison and the Southeast Chapter for joining the event. Today's presenter is Dr. Bill Crawford. In addition to holding a master's degree and PhD in psychology from the University of Houston, Dr. Crawford is a licensed psychologist, author of 8 books, and an organizational consultant. Over the past 30 years, he has created over 3,500 presentations for organizations such as Sprint, Shell, the American Medical Association, and many other organizations and associations, both nationally and internationally. His 2 PBS specials on stress and communication have been seen by over 15 million people. Excuse me. He has been quoted as an expert in publications such as the New York Times, Entrepreneur, Investor's Business Daily, the Chicago Tribune, Working Mother, just to name a few. Without further delay, I give you Dr. Bill Crawford.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Lois, and thank you, Kurt, and all the folks who put this together, and welcome, everybody. I'm really looking forward to sharing my information with you today. It is true, just kind of so we start off, it's true, I do have this PhD, and I am a psychologist. But frankly, the way I like to look at this doctor stuff is I read all those books and took all those courses, so you don't have to. My job is to take everything I've learned from my training, from my experience, as you've heard, been doing this about 30 years, from my life experience, been on the planet over 70 years, that's where I got the gray hair, been married twice, the second one going on 33 years, so I got it right the second time, raising 2 sons, 30, 26. I want to make that practical, meaningful, useful, something you can use tomorrow, this afternoon, tonight, at home, at work. In other words, I really, really want this to be about real life. Not a lot of psychobabble or theory or research, real life. Ways that you can become more influential in your life and in the lives of others. Now, I know that you know more about your real life than I do. So I want you to be paying attention to the questions that pop into your head as I'm going through the material. Feel free to enter them in the message or the chat. And toward the end, when we get to Q&A, I want to make sure that you have time to ask any questions you have. By the way, for those of you who got the link to the manual, I am encouraging you to download it. Several reasons. Number one, you can follow along. You see my visuals. Number two, if you'll notice at the bottom of every page of the manual is my email address. And that is there. So if you have a question after this seminar is over about how to apply anything that you liked, anything that resonated with you to any situation in life, both personal or professional, all you got to do is email me and I will be your consultant for free for life. Because I know I'm going to give you a lot of information today. I want to make sure this is kind of packed full of new information, and I know there's going to be questions that come up. So I just want you to know you're going to have access to me by email for free, for life. Just send me any questions you have after this, and I'll be happy to go through this. All right, I'm going to share my slides here, go to the title, which is Clarity, Confidence, Creativity, New Information on the Science of Dealing with Stress, People, and Life. New information on you becoming more influential in your life and in the lives of others. I think it does need to be new information, so I'm not just telling you what you already know. There's a great quote from Albert Einstein I love that says, problems cannot be solved at the same level of awareness that created them. I really like that because I think it speaks to the importance of new information. Now, an hour and 45 minutes of totally new information might seem a little overwhelming, so here's what I'm going to do. There's a concept called scaffolding, where you tie new information to what people already know, and that makes the new information more accessible. So I'm going to try to do that. But I do think it needs to be new information so that we start with new awareness. That's why I like to start with the concept of clarity, because we've got to have clarity before we can truly access our confidence and our creativity. And this afternoon, what I want to do is give you new information on what I call the what, the why, and the how. What's really getting in the way of our clarity, confidence, and creativity? Why is that happening? And how can we deal with it more specific? I want to give you some specific models you can do immediately that would allow you to deal with stress, difficult people, difficult situations more successfully. Now, there's something I do in my in-person presentations, and I didn't want to lose that when I went virtual. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment, go to full screen, move this aside, and bring this in. This is a flip chart, and it's designed to kind of represent what are the situations that are triggering your stress. So I'm going to call this real life the what. So when I'm talking about the what, the why, and the how, I want this to represent the what. What's getting in the way of our clarity, confidence, and creativity? This says problem triggers. This says problem reactions. I call them problem triggers and problem reactions because not all triggers are problematic and not all reactions are problematic. But I think we've all recognized certain types of people, certain situations have stressed us out, kind of got under our skin, triggered us in the past, and the more we can work with your real life experience, the better. Now, unfortunately, virtually, it's hard to kind of get a list of what that is. So here's what I've done. I've done about 500 of these presentations, and I've polled participants about, okay, what is bugging you? What's getting under your skin? And I put this on this list. So what I want you to do is just imagine that anything that has triggered your stress in the past or is triggering your stress now, or you think might trigger your stress in the future is on this list. So if it's not on this list, just imagine that it is, and this will work. So of course, COVID-19 is at the top of the list, but maybe it's the economy, man. It's kind of getting in the way of us being as successful as you want to be. Isolation, being stuck in these little rooms, especially if you're kind of used to connecting with people. Polarization. Okay, we got an election coming up, and if you notice, people are getting more and more and more polarized based on that, if they weren't already polarized enough. Difficult people, you know, as a manager, as someone who's kind of running a situation, we've got to get people to cooperate with us. But when they're being stubborn or not taking accountability or not listening or argumentative, that can trigger our stress and frustration. Maybe it's our kids and our family. You know, I have a lot of participants tell me, hey, Bill, I'm pretty good at holding it together at work. It's when I get home, that's when I get really triggered. Or maybe it's worrying about our kids and our family. Uncertainty, boy, that's a big one that everybody's dealing with. We kind of thought we would be done with this stuff by now. I was really hoping to be presenting in person by now. Clearly, that's not happening, and we're not quite sure when it will be. Deadlines, deadbeats, in-laws, outlaws, lack of business, whatever. So what I want you to do is just allow this list to represent any situation that has ever triggered your stress. If it's not on this list, just imagine that it is, and this will work. So when we're dealing with all of this stuff, how do we find ourselves reacting? Well, of course, we get stressed, but we also get frustrated, anxious, maybe angry, resentful, confused, especially when we're dealing with difficult people. Hello, I'm trying to help you. Why are you being so difficult? Annoyed, worried, lose focus, lose sleep, get depressed, drives us crazy. So again, what I'd like for you to do is just allow this list to represent any situation that has ever triggered your stress, and this list to represent how we have found ourselves reacting to those triggers. So if your particular trigger isn't on the list, just imagine that it is. If your particular reaction isn't on the list, just imagine that it is. All right, this is the trigger, this is the reaction, this triggers this. Understandable. Now, we don't like feeling stressed, frustrated, anxious, and angry, so when we feel this, what we often do is go over here and try to change whatever we think made us feel that way in the first place. And hey, I'm a big fan. Anytime you can change something in your life and you feel better as a result of it, I'm a big fan. Feel free to go and do that. But have you noticed how many of these situations people over here really can't change? I mean, have you tried to change a difficult person and noticed they didn't say, thank you for sharing, you know, they often got worse. So when we try to change a situation and we can't, or we just notice we can't really do anything about what we think is triggering our stress, that actually triggers another reaction. But this reaction is now more intense because there's a sense of frustration and powerlessness to it. In other words, we start to feel more stressed, more frustrated, more anxious, more angry. And when we try to deal with life from this perspective, we're just not very effective. And that makes the original trigger seem worse, which triggers another reaction, which makes it seem worse, triggers another reaction and makes it seem worse, and reaction and worse, reaction and worse, reaction and worse, until something explodes. I call this the cycle of stress, frustration. And I think this is the what? See, it's not just that we're getting triggered. If we just got a little stressed and all of a sudden could flip up to clarity, confidence, and creativity, hey, where's the problem? It's getting caught in this cycle that I think is the real problem, the real what. So what I want to do is bring you new information today, the science about what's going on here, and new information about how to break this cycle. Now, let me go back to my slides because I think we also need to understand exactly what stress is. Because I think we've been given some bad information about that. See, a lot of people think stress is what something or someone does to us. COVID-19 stresses me out, difficult people stress me out, traffic stress me out, deadlines, lack of business stress me out. And the good news is that's not true. Because if that were true, we would indeed have to change all this before we can feel any differently. What stress really is actually just a series of chemical changes in our body. Those chemicals, for the most part, are adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol. Don't need to remember exactly what they are, other than that's what stress is, a series of chemical changes in our body. Matter of fact, if we look at the relationship between stress and productivity, when there is zero stress in our life, there is zero productivity. It's called sleep. Not real productive while we're sleeping. Now, while we're sleeping, there is very little adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol going throughout our body. Guess which three chemicals wake us up in the morning? Adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol. So for a while in the morning, as our stress goes up, our productivity goes up. We are more productive 30 minutes after we wake up than we are 30 seconds after we wake up. And that's because of these natural, normal, healthy chemicals going off in our body. This is what's called good stress. Wakes us up, gets us going, motivates us in a fight or flight situation. Most people don't have a problem producing enough good stress in our life. For most of us, here's what happens. Stress continues to go up, but our productivity starts to go down, and we kind of crash and burn down there somewhere. This is where it's where we implode, where we explode. This is where burnout happens. So here's what I want to do this afternoon. I want to help you raise your level of awareness of when you first feel pushed over the top. When you first start going from your most productive into this downward spiral. And then what I'm going to do is give you a model that's going to show you how to shift back into what I call the zone of productivity so that you can absolutely bring your best to the situation. So now we know two things about the what. We know it's not just that we're getting triggered, but that we get caught in this vicious cycle. We also know now what stress is, and that gives us new information about the what. Let's talk about the why. When I was getting my PhD, I really wanted to understand, why is this so common? Why do we find ourselves trapped in this cycle? So I actually left the College of Psychology and I went to the College of Biology, and I took a course called the Biological Basis of Behavior. And in it, I learned that everything we think and feel and do and say, how we react to others, how others react to us, all has to do with how the brain processes information. So I've spent the last 30 years of my life creating a system, a philosophy, a framework that I call life from the top of the mind. I put it into a book, and by the way, I've made this book available to each one of your chapters. Check with them. There's a discounted price for each person that has attended this in the chapter. The good news is everything we're going to be talking about today is in the book, plus some extra stuff. But the good news is that it's now a system, it's a philosophy, a framework that I've been working on over the last 30 years that actually shows people how to access their best by accessing a very specific part of the brain. And how to avoid the stress, frustration, anxiety, the stuff that gets in the way of our clarity, confidence, and creativity by avoiding a specific part of the brain. Now, the brain is very complex. People spend their lives studying the brain. So we're not going to get lost in all of this terminology. I want you to think about the brain in three parts: top, middle, and lower brain. Because each one of these parts of the brain do something different. And the more we understand how it works and can influence the process, the more influence we can have in our life and the lives of others. So, lower brain's called the brainstem. You've probably heard of this. This is where our fight or flight responses are located. It's the part of the brain that regulates our muscle tension, heart rate, blood pressure, breathing, etc. We can just call it the the lower brain. Middle brain's called the limbic system. A lot of people call this the emotional brain because this is where our emotions are triggered for the most part. We can just call it the middle brain. What a lot of people don't know about this middle brain, however, and I didn't know this till I took this course, is that this middle brain acts as a gatekeeper. Or in today's terminology, it acts as a scanner, a processor, and a router. It scans incoming data, processes it or interprets it, and then either routes it down to the lower brain or up to the upper 80% of the brain, the neocortex, what I call the top of the mind, where we have access to our interpersonal skills, our problem-solving skills, our clarity, confidence, creativity, compassion, etc. So again, here's where it all starts, and here's how it all works. Data comes in from our 5 senses and it is first scanned by the middle brain. Now, if the middle brain doesn't see a problem, got a remote here in my hand, no problem, sends the data on up to the neocortex, brain stem works in the background, regulating breathing, muscle tension, heart rate, blood pressure, everything's fine. But if this middle brain senses anything or anyone it doesn't like, anything or anyone it has determined to be a problem or a trigger or a stressor or a threat of any kind, or anything or anyone that is similar to any problem, trigger, stress, or threat we've ever experienced in the past, it sends the data immediately down to the lower brain, bypassing the neocortex. At this point, the lower brain can only do 2 things, fight or flight. Now, some people call it fight, flight, or freeze, which is true, but I'm going to lump the flight part in with the freeze part. And by the way, when I'm talking about fight, that doesn't mean we just fight something. This is where we get angry or insistent or try to impose our will. And flight doesn't mean we just run away. This is where we give up, give in, just go, I don't care anymore, get depressed, whatever. Now, what we need to understand is there's some things going on in our body when this happens. Blood pressure goes up, muscle tension goes up, heart rate goes up, and all of that is designed to get us ready to either strike out or withdraw. In the latest brain research, this is called downshifting because it happens so quickly. And again, what we need to know is that it bypasses the most intelligent, capable, purposeful part of who we are. Now, in a fight or flight situation, this is exactly what we want to happen. You know, if we're driving down the road and somebody slams on their brakes in front of us, we want to be able to react without thinking. Because if we had to cognitively process, okay, wait a minute, they just slammed on their brakes, I wonder if I should, we would hit them by that point. So anytime you need to react without thinking, in order to be safe in a physically dangerous situation, this is a perfect part of the brain to go to. The problem is we're being thrown down in this old reactive brain in situations where we need access to our best interpersonal skills, problem-solving skills, clarity, confidence, creativity, etc. If you've read any of Daniel Goleman's work on emotional intelligence, he calls this neural hijacking or emotional hijacking. Some people call it amygdala hijacking, a little tiny part of the limbic system called the amygdala that's kind of the fire alarm part of the brain, hypersensitive to anything that is negative. Regardless of what we're calling it, my hope is this is explaining some things. This is what PTSD is all about. This is what panic attacks or anxiety attacks are all about. This is why people make bad decisions. We could call this the science of effective decision making. This is why people don't make sense. Have you ever been talking to someone and they're just not making any sense? That's because they're coming from the part of the brain that doesn't make sense. See, this is not the rational brain or the logical brain or the purposeful brain. It's the reactive brain. This is why, by the way, when you're trying to give someone information and they're upset, either with you or something else, they don't get it because they're not in the part of the brain that can process data. And this isn't just me saying this. People around the country and around the world are recognizing that until we understand how all this works and are able to influence the process, we're just going to be ruled by this old unconscious brain and trapped in this cycle. So now we got new information about the what. It's not just that we get triggered, but we get caught in a cycle. We also now know what stress is, a series of chemical changes in our body. Now we have new information about the why. You see, this middle brain is misinterpreting something negative as dangerous and throwing us into the part of the brain that's designed to deal with danger. See, the role of the middle brain has always been to keep us alive as a species. So it has a tendency to scan the environment, paying way more attention to negative things than it does positive things, because negative things have the potential to contain a threat, whereas positive things generally don't. Plus, it's not very smart, and it's working with old software. So a long time ago, when we were walking through the jungle and we heard the roar of a saber-toothed tiger, limbic system freaked out, went down to the brainstem, we ran away, and we survived. Unfortunately, at the moment, our limbic system is not caught up with evolution. It still sees all of this stuff as a saber-toothed tiger. Unfortunately, as I've mentioned, it's misinterpreting something negative as dangerous and throwing us into the part of the brain that's designed to deal with danger. That's an important why, because we're going to be able to influence that. By the way, remember what we talked about what stress is, a series of chemical changes in our body, adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol. Cortisol is the big one. You may have heard of that. That is the stress hormone. One of the jobs of cortisol when we're triggered is to rush throughout our body, shutting down what it determines is our non-essential systems so that we can go into fight or flight. So it shuts down our digestive system. Unfortunately, that's where stomach problems, IBS, comes from. It shuts down our immune system. Man, if there's something we need in these crazy times, is a healthy immune system. But when cortisol is rushing throughout our body because it thinks we're in a fight or flight situation, shutting down what it thinks are non-essential systems, it shuts down our immune system and we become more susceptible to illness. Plus, this adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol will manifest itself into stress, frustration, anxiety, resentment, worry, lose focus, lose sleep. And when we try to deal with life from this lower 20% of the brain, we're just not very effective because this lower 20% of the brain isn't designed to deal with these kind of issues, which makes life seem worse. When that happens, the middle brain goes, whoa, more negative data, didn't mean for that to happen, sends it right back down to the brainstem. Now you can see how this external cycle is replicated by this internal cycle. And it's not like this just happens every once in a while. If we're not careful, this can become a lifestyle for us. We can find ourselves trapped in this lower 20% of the brain, trying to deal with rather complex personal and interpersonal situations from this very limited, limiting part of the brain. All right, so now we got new information about the what. Now we got brand new information about the why. The rest of the seminar is going to be about the how. First thing I'm going to do is give you a behavioral model you can do anywhere, anytime, that's going to show you how to shift from the lower brain up into the top of the mind and actually change the chemical makeup of your body from adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol to serotonin and endorphins, chemicals that help us feel better and think clearer. Then I'm going to show you how to stay there, how to live there. I'm going to show you actually how to rewire the brain in a relatively short amount of time, how to create new neural pathways going from this middle brain up to the neocortex versus down to the brainstem so that this can start to become a habit. You can begin to live in this upper 80% of the brain, bringing your best to life. I call the seminar Life from the Top of the Mind. It's what I get to go around the world teaching. It's what I'm looking forward to teaching to you today. It kind of started with me doing 2 PBS specials. You know, you've heard I've done these 2 PBS specials. One was called All Stressed Up and Nowhere to Go, obviously on stress, and the other was on difficult people. As a result of writing those 2 books, doing those 2 PBS specials, I was asked to do a lot of presentations on those 2 subjects. But then I kind of started noticing, you know, life isn't divided into these 2 subjects. It's put together. It's all kind of mushed together. So that's where I took this, and I've been working on it for about 30 years. It's a system that I believe can be applied to pretty much any situation in life. When I do my trainings on culture, I use this material, feedback skills for supervisors, dealing with difficult people, customer service, obviously stress management. I even have a book on parenting that uses this material called How to Get Kids to Do What You Want. So I really believe this material can be applied anywhere in life, and I love going around the world teaching it to you, and I'm really looking forward to teaching it to you today. All right, let's take everything we've learned so far, put it into one slide. Here's what we need to know about triggers. We're always going to be dealing with triggers, okay? Life just has them in. But in the past, it's been one thing. Right now, it's COVID. It's going to be something else. What we don't want triggers determining how we think and feel. So we've got to recognize it's what's happening. If you look at that slide, the yellow part of the slide, the middle brain, remember, is misinterpreting something negative as dangerous and throwing us into the part of the brain that's designed to deal with danger. This is where we get angry, stressed, frustrated based on these chemicals, adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol. And if we're not careful, it's really easy to get caught in this cycle and in this lower brain. So, given that the middle brain, that yellow part of the slide, is the scanner, processor, router part of the brain, it is the part of the brain that determines whether we go down to the brainstem or up to the neocortex. I'm going to show you how to retrain, rewire this middle part of the brain. So it begins to see negative data, not as dangerous, but as something that we want to bring our best to. So it sends it to the upper 80% of the brain where we have access to our clarity, confidence, creativity, compassion, interpersonal skills, problem-solving skills. See, it's this upper 80% of the brain where we become more powerful, more influential in our life and the lives of others. Here's the problem, however. This middle brain and lower brain are unconscious. I mean, we're not doing this on purpose, right? We just find ourselves doing it. There's a quote from Carl Jung that says, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will control your life. So since we don't want these difficult people, these difficult situations controlling our life, we certainly don't want this unconscious brain controlling our life. I'm going to show you how to retrain, reprogram this middle brain so it starts interpreting negative data in a way that allows us to access our best. In order to do that, we've got to start off with clarity. Remember that clarity, confidence, and creativity was the model we started off with? I call it C cubed. I like it because number one, we can look here and see there's not a lot of clarity, confidence, and creativity going on when we are trapped in this cycle. So what this means is these are neocortex top of the mind qualities. This is also what's called a developmental model, meaning we have to have a certain amount of clarity before we can actually access our confidence and our creativity. You may remember that quote from Albert Einstein, problems cannot be solved at the same level of awareness or clarity that created them. So the good news is you are now much more clear about the problem. You know things about the problem that only about 1% of the people on the planet know. See, about 99% of the people on the planet think this makes me this. This will forever trap them in that cycle unless they can change all of this. You now know this is being misinterpreted by a certain part of the brain, this middle brain limbic system. And my stress, my anxiety, my frustration is the result of this misinterpretation. It's a chemical change in my brain and body based on this misinterpretation by the middle brain. That's huge, because I'm going to show you how to change that. A lot of people talk about feeling out of control when they find themselves trapped in this cycle, and they want to regain control. Frankly, I'm a big fan of regaining control because nobody likes to be out of control. Here's the problem. Most people try to control this so they don't feel this. And number one, there's a lot of things over here we can't control. Also, have you noticed when you try to control people, they often don't say thank you for sharing? There's a quote I have in the book that says, you never want to tie your peace of mind to another person's state of mind. What that means is you never want to have to change somebody else before you can bring your best to the situation. Because number one, you've just tied your peace of mind to their state of mind. And number two, have you noticed sometimes when you try to change someone, they get worse because they interpret it as criticism. So when I'm talking about regaining control, I'm talking about this upper 80% of the brain. This clear, confident, creative part of who we are, regaining control from the lower brain. This purposeful, proactive brain, regaining control from the reactive brain. Now, the lower brain normally controls heart rate, kind of hard to control. Lower brain normally controls blood pressure, that's even harder to control. But the lower brain also controls breathing, and that is not hard to control. That's why if you've ever done any stress management or yoga or Tai Chi or mindfulness or martial arts, breathing is always part of the process. It just has to be done in a certain way in order to be effective. If you don't already have your own model, I would encourage you to use one of these two models, either 5x5 or 4-4-4. I like the 4-4-4 model. It's what the Navy SEALs use to refocus, regain control. Good enough for them, good enough for me. It's real simple. You just inhale for a count of 4, hold it for a count of 4, exhale for a count of 4. Easy. 5x5, very simple, very easy. You just inhale for a count of 5 and exhale for a count of 5. Either one of these will work because it will have you breathing slowly and deeply and purposefully, and you're counting. See, there's only one part of the brain that can count. If you ever find yourself dealing with someone who's having a panic attack or an anxiety attack and they want you to help, ask them to count backwards from 100 by 2 or 3. By the time they get to the mid-80s, certainly the mid-70s, you're going to notice a change in their demeanor because it requires this part of the brain to regain control because this upper 80% of the brain is the only part of the brain that can count. Now, if you want to make this first part of the model even more powerful and have this upper 80% of the brain take over 2 functions normally controlled by the lower brain, just say the word relax on the exhale and kind of let your shoulders drop for a little bit. Because if you'll notice, the lower brain normally controls muscle tension and the lower brain normally controls breathing. But when you breathe and count and say the word relax on the exhale and let those shoulders drop, you are actually having the upper 80% of the brain literally regain control by literally taking over two functions normally controlled by the lower brain. Let me show you what that looks like and feels like. I'm going to do the 4-4-4 model. Inhale for a count of 4, hold it for a count of 4, exhale for a count of 4, say the word relax on the exhale, kind of let my shoulders drop. Looks like this. Relax. Now, you may need to do this more than once, okay? Depends on how deeply we are in the cycle. You want to do this until you feel centered, until you feel in control. It's not designed to totally fix everything, but it is designed to put this part of the brain in control. By the way, for those of you who like to know the science behind all of this, it's called the vagus nerve. If you haven't heard about the vagus nerve, you will. It is the nerve that represents the mind-body connection. You know, we've always known there is a mind-body connection. Now we know what it is. It's called the vagus nerve. There is a nerve that goes from the brain down to the body and from the body back up to the brain. So when the brain tells the lungs to breathe deeply, the lungs tell the brain to trigger more serotonin and endorphins, breathe deeply, more serotonin and endorphins. Now we're creating a brand new cycle, balancing sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system in a way that allows us to regain control. In other words, there's tons of science behind the breathing part. By the way, for those of you who have downloaded the manual, you'll notice the very last page of the manual has all of my references on there. So if you want to see the science behind all of this, you can look there. Or you can just Google how breathing calms the brain, the science of slow, deep breathing. I love this one, the effect of diaphragmatic breathing on negative affect stress in healthy adults. Great stuff. Tons of science on this breathing component. In other words, breathing, saying the word relax on the exhale, counting will take you from bad to better. It will pause the cycle, but it doesn't break the cycle. And it just makes you feel a little bit better. But here's what I've noticed about most people. You don't want to just go for better. You want to be able to access your best in challenging situations. So in order to access our best, number one, we got to know what part of the brain it comes from. And number two, we got to go beyond just breathing and relaxing. Breathing and relaxing are good because it will move you from bad to better. But if you want to access your best, these are what are called the physiological components of stress. In order to access our best, we've got to go to what I call the psychological aspects of stress, anxiety, and frustration. These are a little bit hard to put our fingers on, but they're very powerful. And the most powerful of these psychological aspects, the one that we can use right away, are what are called the power of questions. See, questions actually determine what part of the brain we're in. I call them the search engine for the brain. For example, if I were to type a question into this computer and punch send or enter, it will go searching its databanks and the web for the answer. But it wouldn't determine, is this a good question or a bad question or a helpful question or not a helpful question? It would attempt to answer any question we ask. Our brain is the same way. When we ask a question, it doesn't evaluate the quality of the question. It tries to answer any question we ask, and here's the problem. When we are stressed or frustrated, anxious, angry, resentful, confused, and annoyed, we are asking what I call BS questions. BS stands for brainstem, by the way, in case you're worried about that. Like, what is wrong with these people? How many times do I have to say the same thing over and over? Or who taught this idiot to drive? Get off the road. What were you thinking? Or how long are we going to have to stay in these little rooms and deal with this stuff? Why don't people get their act together? Or with my kids, man, what were you thinking? How many times have we talked about this? See, those are all understandable questions, but those are brainstem questions. Those are questions about the problem and the pain of the problem, and they're designed to throw us in the part of the brain that's designed to deal with pain. Now, why is someone running at me with a knife? That's a pretty good brainstem question, because that requires a fight or flight response. But what we don't want to be doing is triggering this fight or flight part of the brain when we're really going for the upper 80% of the brain. So here's what I suggest we do instead. Breathe and relax until you feel in control. May take 2 times, may take 4 times, depends on how deeply we are in the cycle. Then if we want the top of the mind to be in charge, and questions are that powerful, let's make sure we're asking what I call top of the mind questions. Top of the mind questions are questions that can only be asked and answered by this upper 80% of the brain. And they should provide some clarity in terms of what's going on here. For example, one of them is, was this thought, emotion, or action chosen on purpose? Well, no, we don't get stressed, frustrated, anxious, angry, resentful, confused, annoyed on purpose. So that's a no. Next one's a good old Dr. Phil question. How's it working for me? Is this helping me create the life I want? Do I like being like this? Most people say no. It's understandable, but it's not particularly effective. It doesn't really help us produce the results we want. The third one I love goes a little bit deeper. It says, is this the way I want to be defined? See, I think we have to ask ourselves, whenever we find ourselves caught in this cycle, are we defining who we are? Or are we being defined by difficult people, difficult situations in our life? Because when we say, this makes me this, COVID stresses me out, difficult people really make me angry, my kids drive me crazy, whenever we say this makes us this, what we're doing is we're giving the difficult people, difficult situations in our life, the power to define us or control us. I don't think we want these people to have that kind of power. So if we don't want them or these situations or this lower brain to have the power to define who we are, to make us feel a certain way, my solution is that we define ourselves. We take on that power. We define ourselves from this very purposeful, powerful part of the brain. And if you are influential in other people's lives, if you are a leader, either in your workplace or at home, there is a concept I encourage leaders to adopt. I call it the videotape concept. Nobody uses videotape anymore, but work with me here. I think you'll like it. It basically says leaders or people who are influential in other people's lives should be willing to interact with those people in such a way that that interaction could be videotaped and used as a training film for how we want them to interact with everybody else. Now, I know we're all human beings, so I'm sure we can think of a time in the past where we're going, boy, I'm glad that one wasn't on videotape. So it's not about being perfect, but it is about being purposeful. See, we represent to someone how powerful people get things done. Someone is looking at us as a model for how powerful people get things done, and they will emulate what they see us do. So I think what we want to do is to make sure we're being a certain way that if people are emulating it, it is exactly how we want them to be. And I think these questions can help, because we can say, hey, am I doing this on purpose? No. Is this really working for me? No. Is this how I want to be defined? No. I love the fourth question. It may be more powerful than all three put together. It says, would I teach or recommend this way of being to my child, my children, or someone I love? Man, as a parent, that just bottom lines it for me. But now I'm starting to work with high school kids, college kids, people who don't have kids. They love this question. Because frankly, I have yet to meet anyone that would teach someone they love on purpose to be stressed and frustrated and anxious and angry, resentful, confused, annoyed, and worried. So I call these questions the 4 criteria, because I think we can use them as a criteria for whether we hold on to any of these, and a criteria for shifting from the problem to a focus on the solution. Let me stop sharing for a moment and show you what I'm talking about. I do this in my in-person presentations. Stop sharing, move this aside. So now we have some clarity here. We know we're not doing this on purpose. It's not really working for us. It's not how I want to be defined. And no, I would never teach or recommend this to someone I love. So I asked my participants around the country, okay, so what if we were dealing with life, all the challenging people and situations in life, in a way that's more purposeful, in a way that we believe is more effective, in a way that does make the statement we want to make about who we are, and in a way we would teach to someone we love, what would that look like? So the people around the country said, well, hey, I want to be more confident, more calm, more creative, optimistic, clear, authentic. I love the authentic part. So you're not having to fake something. There's a great quote from Sidney Poitier that says you don't have to become someone you're not to become better than you are. So I'm not trying to change anybody in here into somebody you're not. You all have your own style, your own personality. I just want you to be able to access your best by accessing and being able to know how to access a very specific part of the brain. And I want you to be able to do that authentically so you're not having to fake something. They said, I want to be more kind, more influential. That's certainly true. Resilient, flexible, productive, in control, empathetic. Now, you might have a different list, but I think we can all agree that this list does fit the 4 criteria. It's chosen on purpose. We know we're certainly going to be more effective when we're this way. It defines us the way we want to be defined. And isn't this exactly what we would teach to those we love? So I'm going to suggest we do this. If we want to break the cycle, let's break the cycle. You know, I have people telling me, okay, Bill, I've done the breathing before and it works, but after I stop breathing, here comes the anxiety again. And that's because it didn't break the cycle, it just paused the cycle. So if we want to truly break the cycle, let's break the cycle. In other words, how valuable would it be if after learning this material in the future, instead of reacting like this, you could respond like this? Now, notice what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about the difference between a reaction and a response. A reaction is a reaction. We're acting the way we have in the past. Response comes from the Latin spondere. It means to pledge or to sponsor. And what we're talking about here is choosing a response versus having this old unconscious reactive brain decide who we are and how we are, which really makes all the difficult people, difficult situations in our life way more powerful than we want them to be. So again, what I want to do is bring you new information, not only about how to break the cycle, but how to access our best. And I think these 4 questions can help. Because in the future, if we ever find ourselves, let me show you and go back to sharing the slides here for a moment. If we ever find ourselves feeling stressed, frustrated, anxious, annoyed in the future, we can go, wait a minute, am I doing this on purpose? Is this really working for me? Is this making the statement I want to make about who I am? Would I teach or recommend this to someone I love? See, I bet you're going to get some clarity there. I bet the answer is going to be no, 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 and no. And see, that clarity tells us what part of the brain we're in. I was thinking, wouldn't it be cool if I could create an app where all we had to do is touch the watch and it would tell us what part of the brain we're in? Cool. But in many ways, we don't need the app because these 4 questions will do that. Because anytime we find ourselves feeling stressed, frustrated, angry, whatever, and go, wait a minute, am I doing that on purpose? Is this really working for me? Is this how I want to be defined? Would I teach or recommend this to someone I love? I bet we're going to get no, 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 and no, and that tells us we're in the lower brain. Now, here's something really important. It isn't just about stopping feeling stressed or becoming less stressed or less angry or frustrated. You know, as a psychologist, people come to me and they say, Bill, I want to be less stressed. I want to be less angry. I want to be less frustrated. But frankly, just being less of this does not make us this. So here's how to actually access our best versus just trying to be less stressed. When we recognize we're not doing that on purpose, it's not working for us, it's not making the statement we want to make about who we are, and we wouldn't teach it to someone we love, we use those same questions to say, okay, what if I were dealing with COVID-19 or a difficult person or deadline or my kids or whatever, any trigger? What if I were dealing with one of these triggers in a way that was more purposeful, in a way that I believe is more effective, in a way that does define me the way I want to be defined, and in a way I would teach to someone I love? What would that look like? Now, what I'm going to encourage you to do is to come up with a list, and I'm going to encourage you to blend yin and yang, calm, confident, kind and authentic and influential, in control and empathetic. Because if all we are is confident and powerful and assertive, then that can intimidate people. If all we are is just kind of kind and calm and empathetic, then they may not take us seriously. But when we're blending what's called the powerful and the graceful, think of yourself as like an Aikido master, and you're centered and you're focused, and someone throws a punch and you go, my goodness, tell me more about that. So rather than being thrown off center, you keep your center, you keep your balance, and you're able to stay in this clear, confident, creative part of who you are. In order to do that, you first have to know who you are when you are in this part of the brain. So what I'm going to do in a minute is give you an opportunity to write those down for you. But just for the moment, just imagine it's some of this. In order for us to bring this to life, just making a list doesn't do it. In order for us to bring this to life, we've got to be able to imagine being this way in this situation. So what I would encourage you to do is ask yourself a question. Have you ever been calm and confident in the past? Well, of course. What does that look like? What does that feel like? What's your tone of voice like when you're calm and confident? What's your body language like? So you want to be able to hold an image of who you are when you're being this way, and then imagine bringing that into dealing with one of these triggers. We've got to be able to do this in our imagination before we can do it in real life. Because if we can't do it in our imagination, there's very little chance we're going to be able to pull it off in real life. That's the good news. Here's the bad news. A lot of people go, well, yeah, Bill, okay, but we can do it in our imagination, but it's just our imagination. That's not real. Let me show you how powerful our imagination is. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment because I want you to see this. Here's what I want you to do. Everybody take your hand, hold it up to your mouth like this. I know it's weird, but trust me, it'll be meaningful in a minute. All right, imagine, use your imagination, imagine you're holding a lemon. See the bumpy yellow rind of the outside of the lemon? Now we slice the lemon in half and there's like lemon juice running down your hand. You can see the shiny yellow pulp of the inside of the lemon. If you squeeze the lemon, juice squirts up. Now everybody take a big bite of your lemon. All right, you can put your lemon down now. You notice what happened? Saliva muscles. Some people are going, salt, margarita, help me out. Some people taste lemon juice. That's how powerful that is. But let's get very clear. There is no lemon. All right? Here's what's just happened. You have just changed the chemical makeup of your body. Anything that happened as a result of you imagining biting in that lemon, saliva muscles, that was a chemical change in your brain and body. You've just changed the chemical makeup of your body based not on what you held in your hand, but what you held in your mind and your imagination. And what that tells us is the brain will change chemically based on any image we hold in our mind, whether it's happening or not. So you knew you weren't really biting into a lemon, but your body reacted as if you were. So when you find yourself having an argument with someone and you run that argument over and over and over in your mind after it's over, we're triggering those chemicals. Someone cuts us on the freeway. We run that over and over, go tell somebody about it, we're triggering those chemicals. We watch something in the news and we get all upset about it and we just think about it over and over and over, we're triggering those chemicals. So you want to be very purposeful about the images you hold in your mind, the stories you tell to people, because they will be triggering a very powerful chemical reaction. So going back to the slides, we now know that anytime we want to be able to shift to the top of the mind, we breathe and relax until we feel in control. We ask ourselves those 4 questions. We choose a quality or characteristic that's more purposeful, more effective, defines who we are, that we would teach or recommend to someone we love. We imagine being that way. We imagine bringing that to life. Then the last step, and the first part of this model, is to notice the change. Because at this point in the model, you will be feeling more calm, more confident, more in control, because each one of these steps are neocortex in nature. Plus the N in notice helps me spell brain. I like my models to spell things. You would not believe how long it took me to make it spell brain, by the way, but I think that's important. Because see, we got to be able to remember this. This is something we're going to need to practice in order to be good. And the fact that it spells brains, people have told me, is helpful because it helps them remember the concept. I'm going to give you one more tool because I want to give you as many tools as possible to bring this to life. Here's another tool you can use when we find ourselves trapped in the cycle. By the way, we will find ourselves in the cycle. There's too many old neural pathways, and this is too habitual for it to never happen again. So the next time it happens, we can go, okay, wait a minute, I've got new awareness here. Rather than thinking this is making me this, I go, wait a minute, I know what's going on. My lower brain is controlling my reaction and limiting my clarity, confidence, and creativity. See, that's brand new awareness. Then we can begin to use our old reaction as a valuable signal. There's a quote I have in my book that says, stress is a signal something needs to change. Suffering is when we don't make the change. So if we can use our stress, our frustration, our resentment as a valuable signal that I need to change what part of my brain is in control. Of course, if the answer is no, we're going to stay trapped in the cycle. But if the answer is yes, you now have a model that's going to allow you to actually change what part of the brain is in control and shift from triggering chemicals like adrenaline, noradrenaline, cortisol to serotonin and endorphins. And by the way, as you begin to get good at this, you don't always have to do the breathing and relaxing. I'll give you a story that happened to me. I travel a lot, or I used to travel a lot. I plan to travel a lot in the future when all of this is fixed, right? And about 6 months or so ago, I was doing a presentation in Long Island. I'm in Houston. So I went to the airport. I was looking forward to the trip. I enjoy traveling. I enjoy airports. I enjoy planes. I enjoy rental cars and hotels. So I was really looking forward to traveling. And I got to the airport and they said, yeah, we've canceled your flight. I could start to feel the cortisol go down the back of my neck. But since I knew what it was, I was able to catch it really, really early and go, okay, kind of shift back up there and say, all right, okay, so I know the qualities and characteristics I want to bring to life. All right, okay, so I asked the person at the ticket counter, all right, so how am I going to get to Long Island? They said, don't worry, we've rerouted you through Orlando and you're going to get there about 12 o'clock tonight. And I went, yeah, no, that's not going to work. I go to bed really early. I got to be fresh in the morning. Is there a city near Long Island I can fly to directly and then I can drive to Long Island? She went, oh, let me see. Well, look, there's a flight direct to LaGuardia. I went, terrific. She says, great, here's your ticket. The flight is boarding right now. Now, I'm at the ticket counter in Houston. It's not a small airport. And I said, here came the cortisol, but I knew what it was and I caught it early and I knew, and I was optimistic, I bet I can make this plane. So I got TSA pre-check, kind of gave me even more reason to think I can probably make this plane. So I took my bags through the thing, walked through the little deal, and it went beep. You have been chosen as a random person to be screened. Here came the cortisol. And there was a person who's going to screen me, and they were screening somebody else. And they were having the best time. They were talking and joking. I was going, hello, plane is boarding now. You see, there was a part of me, the limbic system was taking the fact that I didn't have a lot of time to get to the plane as dangerous and throwing me into the part of the brain that's designed to deal with danger. But because I caught it early, I was able to shift to the top of the mind. Also, here's how I do this. I think it's my job to walk my talk. If I'm out there getting all stressed up about everything, I shouldn't be up here teaching you about it. So here's what I do. Every time I'm out and something triggers me, I just imagine all of you are watching me going, all right, let's see how the hotshot psychologist deals with this. In other words, I think that my life should be a representation of my method and my manual and my book. And so therefore, when I'm engaging a situation that has the potential to be a trigger, I just imagine you guys are watching to see, okay, let's see how good he is at this. Let's see how powerful this system is. We can do this with our family and our kids, by the way, because we always want our kids to emulate the best of who we are. And if we just imagine our kids are following us around with a notepad going, hey, mom, dad, teach me how to deal with traffic. Teach me how to deal with difficult people. Teach me how to deal with business. We were doing everything we were doing as if someone we loved were watching and taking notes, and we wanted them to emulate everything they saw us do. That's going to be really helpful in us getting really good at this. Okay, so now we know what's going on. We know the what. It's not that just we're getting triggered, it's we're getting caught in a cycle. We know what stress is, a series of chemical changes in our body. We now know the why. This middle brain is misinterpreting something negative as dangerous, throwing us into the part of the brain that's designed to deal with danger. And now we know the how. The brain model is the how, to shift from the lower brain to the upper brain and actually change the chemical makeup of our body. Let's talk about how to stay there, how to live there. In other words, if we don't want to have to do the brain model over and over and over and over and over every time we find ourselves in the lower brain, how do we rewire the brain? How can we kind of make sure that this starts to become a new habit, that all of a sudden we do this almost without thinking? Well, here's the deal. In order to do that, we have to start with knowing something that only a few people on the planet know. Remember, you and about another 1% of the people on the planet know this. Remember, most people think this makes me this. But you now know this middle brain is the scanner, processor, router part of the brain. It is the part of the brain that determines whether we go down to the brainstem or up to the neocortex. So in order to live in this upper 80% of the brain and bring these qualities to life on a regular basis, we have to make being in the upper 80% of the brain really, really, really important. That's why I call it our highest purpose. In order to do this confidently and creatively, we've got to have clarity about our highest purpose, and we've got to know how important this is. In fact, if you really want this to become a habit, for a while, this has to become, living in this upper 80% of the brain, going there and staying there, has to become one of the most important things in your life. Now, when I say this, sometimes I get some pushback on that. People say, well, Bill, my kids are the most important thing in my life. Or my family, that's the most important thing in my life. Or my business, people are depending on me. That's the most important thing in my life. And I get it. I got kids, I got a family, I got a business. I know how important all of those are. But have you noticed sometimes things happen with your kids and your family and your business that you can't control? So I'm going to suggest you never want to make the most important thing in your life something that is beyond your control. That is a recipe for stress, frustration, anxiety. However, what if we make coming from the top of the mind and accessing the best of who we are the most important thing in our life? Guess what? We're automatically the best parents we can be. We're automatically the best relationship partners, the best family members we can be. We're automatically the best decision makers we'll be, because all of that comes from this upper 80% of the brain. It's just that we've got to make it important, because if we don't, our old habits will continue to throw us in the lower brain. And here's the why of all of that. Notice these lines going from middle brain down to the lower brain, middle brain to the upper brain. These are what are called neural pathways in the brain. And a neural pathway isn't just a thought process. It's a hardwired routing of thought, emotion, and behavior. Here's a good example. Let's assume there's a field of grain over here. If I were to walk through that field of grain once, it would be a little bit hard to find that path. But if I were persistent and went down that path again and again and again and again, pretty soon that path would become wide, well-worn, easy to find, easy to go down. That's why it's so easy to go from here to here. Because frankly, we've been doing this on some level ever since we're little kids. So we all come to today with some pretty significant neural pathways that are throwing us into this lower brain. We don't have to worry about that. We just need to understand that it exists. If we change nothing, these neural pathways will continue to influence us in a way we would probably not recommend to those we love. But let's assume we want to create a new pathway. So this is a field of grain, and we want to create a new pathway. Well, the first time I went down that pathway, it would be a little bit hard to find. But if I were persistent and went down that pathway again and again and again and again, pretty soon this path would become wide, well-worn, easy to find, easy to go down. This path would start to grow over with weeds. So that's the power of practicing this. We're actually rewiring the brain. Remember I talked about the amygdala? That's the fire alarm part of the brain. That's the part of the brain that's connected to the lower brain. The hippocampus is the part of the middle brain that's connected to the upper 80% of the brain, the neocortex. So what we want to do is strengthen the connection between the limbic system, hippocampus, and the neocortex, and minimize the amygdala and the brainstem. You don't have to worry about it going away. It will always be there in case we need to react. However, we won't be finding ourselves doing it just all the time. Matter of fact, this will start to become our new habit. Okay, let's make this meaningful in your life. This is a nice list, this is a nice list, and this is a nice list, but these are group lists, and it's not even your group, all right? So if you have printed out the manual, turn to page 6 of the manual. If you haven't printed out the manual, I want you to draw 3 boxes somewhere on a piece of paper that look like this. Because anything you write down in these boxes, you should be able to deal with more successfully at the end of the seminar, so I want to make sure I circle back on this. So if you're drawing the 3 boxes, the box on the left is blank, the one in the middle says problem triggers, the one on the right says problem reactions. Just kind of draw those 3 boxes for a minute. All right. In the middle of the box, I want you to write down your top 4 triggers. Top 4 either difficult people, difficult situations that have triggered your stress, frustration, anxiety, or resentment in the past. Could be COVID-19, could be isolation, technology, email, politics, difficult people, stock market, whatever. What I want you to do is write down your top 4 triggers, because the more awareness we have of our triggers, the less we're going to be taken by surprise, caught off guard in the future. So I'll be quiet for a moment while you write down your top 4 triggers. Could be the name of a person, could be politics, could be the other candidate, it could be a spouse, could be our kids, could be someone at work, could be work in general, lack of work. Just want to have, though, some knowledge of that. Matter of fact, what I would encourage you to do sometimes after this seminar is over is complete this list. Make it as comprehensive as possible, personal and professional. Because the more awareness you have of what has triggered you in the past, the less you're going to be able to be caught off guard and surprised by that. Okay, on the box on the far right, I want you to write down your top 4 reactions. When you've been dealing with these triggered in the past, how have you found yourself reacting most often? I've got stress, frustrated, angry, self-doubt. That's one people talk about a lot. Annoyed, shut down, overwhelmed, depressed, anxious, worried. Other people have put stress, frustrated, anxiety, anger, resentment, confused, annoyed, worried, lose focus, lose sleep, depressed, drives me crazy. Write down your top 4 reactions. Could be one of these, could be kind of lash out or withdraw, could be yell, could be get angry, could be lose it, whatever it is. We want to be aware of that. And what I would encourage you to do a little bit later on is complete this list as well, because the more comprehensive you have a list of your old triggers and your old reactions, it's going to put you in a very powerful position going forward to influence this without you having to go to the brainstem first. All right, here's what I like to do. I like to change the problem into part of the solution. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to scratch out the word problem reactions in this box on the far right, and somewhere above that box, write the words valuable signal. Valuable signal. That little red light, or the little graphic on the slide, is a signal, a little kind of representing a little red light that goes off in our dashboard. You know, we're driving down the road, a little red light goes off in the dashboard. See, that little red light isn't the problem. It's part of the solution. It's there on purpose. It lets us know something needs our attention, something needs to change. So remember that quote, stress, anxiety, frustration, resentment, any old reaction is a signal something needs to change. When we pay attention and use it as a valuable signal, then we're able to make a difference right then. We don't have to kind of find ourselves caught in suffering in order to make the change. It turns the problem into part of the solution by making it a valuable signal. Let's make the original trigger part of the solution as well. I want you to scratch out the word problem triggers, and somewhere above that box, write the words practice field. Practice field. We're going to turn the problem into the practice field. You know, sports teams have a practice field. They go there, they run their offense, their defense, they figure out what the other team's going to do, they practice, they practice, they practice, so that when they get in the game, it's almost automatic. They know exactly what to do. We don't have a practice field, but I'm going to suggest life is going to give us plenty of opportunities to practice. And I'm also suggesting we're always practicing something. That means we're always finding ourselves kind of reinforcing one of 2 reactions. That means we're either going to be practicing this or going to be practicing this. I'm going to suggest we don't need to practice this anymore. We're already really good at it, you know? In other words, if we ever need to be angry, stressed, or frustrated, we kind of know how to do that. This is going to require some practice. So let's see what you want to practice. On the box on the far right, left, I want you to write highest purpose above the line. Speaks to how important it's going to need to be in order for us to get good at this. And then below that, I want you to write down the qualities and characteristics you want to be able to access in the future when you're dealing with one of your old triggers. So I've got clear, confident, empathetic, creative, curious, wise, patient, flexible, open, authentic. Feel free to use any of those. Your other colleagues have said confident, calm, creative, optimistic, clear, authentic, kind, influential. That's probably one I could put on mine. Purposeful, resilient, flexible, productive, in control, empathetic. I'll be quiet while you make your list. No wrong answer, although I would encourage you to make sure you're putting something you want versus what you don't want. A lot of people put less stressed or less frustrated, less angry, but we don't really just want to talk about, but frankly, just being less stressed doesn't necessarily make us confident. So you go for what you want versus what you don't want. And again, I do encourage you to blend yin and yang, calm and confident, kind and influential, in control and empathetic, flexible, resilient, not resentful, flexible, resilient, productive, etc. Okay, so what I'm going to encourage you to do is, after this is over, go back to this list. Number one, I want to make sure that I've showed you how to deal with any one of these, and we're going to show you some more before it's all over with, but I want to kind of go back after this is all over. And I want you to make sure that you have as much awareness as possible, because the more awareness you have of your old triggers, the more awareness you have of your old reactions. And notice we've made the old reaction part of the solution by making it a valuable signal. We've made this trigger part of the solution by turning it into the practice field. Here's a good example. Let's assume IFMA has billions of dollars and it doesn't know what to do with. And Lois and Kurt and Chris are all getting $500,000 a week, and they're just saying, stop it, just embarrassing, stop it, stop it, stop it. They don't know what to do with the money. I'd say, hey, I know what to do with the money. Give it to me. And we would all go on a 6-month seminar. We'll go buy an island. We got billions of dollars. On half the island, we'll build Club Med. Wake up in the morning, Club Med, breakfast in bed, swimming under the palm trees. It'll be great. On the other side of the island, we'll build homes that look like your homes in a city that look like your city. We'll build offices and buildings that look like the buildings that you work in. And we'll stock this environment with androids that look like all the people in your life, your kids, your spouse, and all the people at work, your customers, etc. Your job will be to go to the other side of the island to practice living and working on purpose. I think you do a great job, because you would know exactly why you're there. See, the environment would be there specifically for you to practice with, and anything we practice, we get good at. We do that for 6 months, you would have rewired the brain. You'd be able to come back into real life already changed in a way that really serves you. That's the good news. Here's the bad news. Lois and Kurt and Chris will probably tell you they're probably not getting $500,000 a week. IFMA probably doesn't have billions of dollars it doesn't know what to do with, and therefore we can't go buy our island. But the good news is we don't have to, because the good news is it already exists. It's called life. If we'll see this as an opportunity to practice this, we are using life versus life using us. But there's one thing we've got to learn in order to be able to do that. We've got to learn the cause of our thoughts, emotion, and behavior. What does this middle brain use to determine whether it sends data down to the lower brain or up to the upper 80% of the brain? That means we have to have clarity about our highest purpose, but we also have to have clarity about our old past responses. And most importantly, we got to have clarity about what I call our piece of the pie. Our perceptions, our interpretations, our expectations. In fact, I'm going to suggest it's our perceptions, interpretations, and expectations that actually create our thoughts, emotions, and behavior. Let me give you an example. Let's assume you have 2 people in a room. One person is afraid of dogs. She's been afraid of dogs almost all her life. Maybe she was bitten by a dog when she was young. Maybe her parents taught her to be afraid of dogs. Regardless, she believes dogs are dangerous. Second person in the room just loves dogs. She's got about 10 dogs at home. She thinks dogs are God's gift to the universe. You bring a dog into the room. Fact. You got 2 totally different reactions. The person that believes dogs are dangerous interprets this as a dangerous situation. Expectation is I'm going to be hurt. Emotion is fear. Behavior is I'm out of here. The person that loves dogs goes, a dog, goes to pet the dog. Here's the thing. It's the same dog. Okay? The dog can't be causing the reaction. It's the same dog. What's causing two totally different reactions? One runs away, the other moves toward, are people's perceptions, interpretations, expectations about dogs. So folks, all we got over here is just a bunch of old dogs we've been reacting to in old ways. So what we've got to recognize is there's some beliefs that are triggering these old reactions. And in the past, they may have been unconscious. Matter of fact, there's a gentleman by the name of Albert Ellis. He came up with what's called the ABC model. I'm going to go to full screen here so you can see this. He calls this A for the adverse event, and he calls this C for the consequence. He says the problem that people have is they believe that A causes C. And he says the good news is A doesn't cause C. A is filtered through B, and B causes C, and B are our beliefs. And now we know B is our brain. So if we want to be able to access our best, regardless of the situation, access this clear, confident, creative part of the brain, we've got to choose very purposeful beliefs. Because here's the problem. See, in the past, we have believed that certain people and situations are annoying and stressful and frustrating and depressing and irritating. If we hold on to the belief that people in life can be annoying and stressful and frustrating and depressing and irritating, guess what we do? We interpret anytime we're dealing with this person as annoying, stressful, frustrating, depressing, and irritating, and we set ourselves up to be annoyed and stressed and frustrated and depressed and irritated. In other words, we set up an expectation that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Therefore, what I would encourage you to do is not define another situation or person as annoying or frustrating, because that's defining them in terms of their effect on us. And I would encourage you not to define yourself in terms of how people have affected you in the past, because that's giving them way more power than you want. So what we need to do is look at the beliefs that may be triggering these old responses. There's a gentleman who wrote a book by the name of The Fifth Discipline. His name is Peter Senge. Talks about the learning organization. Excellent book. One of his 5 disciplines is what he calls suspending our beliefs. And I love that idea of suspending our beliefs. We hold them up and we look at them. And I tell you what we can do. We can use the 4 criteria to determine whether we want to hang on to the belief or change it. So let's assume we have a belief about difficult people. So let's use the 4 criteria. We can say, hey, have I chosen this belief on purpose? Is this belief really working for me? Is it helping me be more effective with these people? Is this the way I want to be defined? I believe difficult people make me this. Would I teach or recommend this belief to someone I love? Now, if the answer is yes, 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 and this, you've chosen it on purpose, it's working really well for you, it defines who you are in a way you would teach to someone you love, that's probably a great belief. If the answer is no, what we want to do is choose a belief that allows us to access this. In other words, if we want this to be the consequence, we want to choose a belief that allows us to access our best. And here's a way to do that. If you don't want to have to change this belief and 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 this belief, if you want to do it all in one fell swoop, here's what you do. You make this an opportunity to practice this. We see life as a practice field where we go in defining who we are in a way that meets the 4 criteria, in a way that defines who we are in a way we would teach to someone we love. See, that's giving purpose and meaning to life. The meaning is this is our practice field, and my highest purpose is to go in and define who I am. There's a gentleman, a psychologist, who wrote a quote about dealing with life. He says, life is never made unbearable by circumstances, but only by a lack of meaning and purpose. Now, a lot of people go, well, yeah, you know how psychologists are. They say these things. They live in these ivory towers. You know, this person isn't dealing with real life. Well, this person's name was Viktor Frankl. And this was in a book that he calls Man's Search for Meaning. And he wrote this quote, life is never made unbearable by circumstances, but only by a lack of meaning and purpose. He wrote that quote while he was in Auschwitz. Can you think of any more difficult situation, any more difficult person situation than that? So if he can find meaning and purpose in Auschwitz and it allowed him to survive that terrible situation, I bet we can deal with COVID and difficult people and all this. Here's the question. Do we want to live a life of choice or a life of chance? And how important is this? Because those questions will determine whether we're able to pull this off. A life of choice is a life of conscious action. A life of chance is a life of unconscious reaction. Do we want the conscious, purposeful part of the brain choosing how we want to be? Or do we want this old unconscious part of the brain in charge of how we find ourselves being? Now, here's the cool thing. As we practice conscious choice over and over and over and over, guess what it does? It begins to make the unconscious conscious and rewires this middle brain. So if you want to know how to get really good at this really quickly and keep it from fading, or how to make this a habit, here's what we do. We don't wait until we're dealing with a difficult person or a difficult situation, but because by that time we're triggered. We start at the very beginning. So I suggest you wake up, and before you get out of bed, before you look at your phone, before you turn on the TV, before you talk to anybody, before you do anything, you ask yourself a top of the mind question: what's my highest purpose this morning? I dropped my remote here for a moment. Yeah. Pardon me there for a moment. What's my highest purpose this morning? Just the morning, by the way. I know some of the people I'm going to be dealing with, some of the situations I'm going to be in. Who do I want to be? How do I want to be? And we go into the morning practicing how we want to be. Anything we practice, we get good at. And practicing doesn't mean we have to do it perfectly. We just want to do it purposefully. Who do I want to be with my kids? Who do I want to be with my spouse? Who do I want to be when I'm driving to work and somebody cuts me off? Who do I want to be when I get to work and people dump 10 things on me? The more we have a clear sense of who we want to be, and our highest purpose is to go into the morning practicing that, that makes the morning something we deal with from the top of the mind. And of course, if not, we can always do the brain model and shift back up. Then around lunchtime, you reboot. Very powerful. If I were to reboot this computer, it would just restart it. It would put everything back where it goes. You do the brain model, you say the prayer, you take a walk outside, you do some deep breathing, you do something that creates a moment of clarity, moment of serenity. Stephen Covey calls it the pause button. Viktor Frankl, in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, calls it the space between the stimulus and the response. Only takes about 15, 20, 30 seconds, a minute top. If I were to sit here and time a minute, it would seem like an eternity. So it doesn't take that long. Well, I know we're all busy, but can you spare, let's put it this way, is your peace of mind worth 15 to 20 to 30 seconds? If so, you can do this in 15 to 20 to 30 seconds, do the brain model, say a prayer, do some deep breathing, and then you want to ask yourself a question: what's my highest purpose this afternoon? Just the afternoon. I know some of the people I'm going to be dealing with, some of the situations I'm going to be in. Who do I want to be? How do I want to be? Go into the afternoon practicing being that way. If we've got a customer we need to deal with, if someone is coming into our office that has been a problem in the past, we want to make sure we're dealing with them from the top of the mind, so we're not being triggered by them. We're not letting those old reactions throw us into that old reactive brain. Then on the drive home, sometime between the afternoon and the evening, you stop and you reboot. And here's where we ask ourselves, I think, a really important question. What's my highest purpose this evening? Who do I want to be with the most important people in my life? People that I love the most and who love me the most. So many people in my seminars say, hey, Bill, you know, I can keep it together at work. It's when I get home, that's where I get triggered. And I think that's because when we're at work, we have some idea of who we need to be in order to be effective. You know, we've got some idea about that. We're more purposeful at work. When we get home, we stop being purposeful, and that just opens us up to being triggered. Plus, have you noticed we're a little bit more in charge at work than we are at home, and that can trigger us. Well, but these are the most important people in our life. And of course, if you've got kids, we know kids don't always do what we say, but they will do what we do. Want to make sure we're going into the evening practicing being away. Our kid is watching and taking notes. Reminds me of a picture I saw one time. It was a picture of a toddler standing in a grocery cart. He was kind of standing at the end of the grocery cart. And the thought bubble, or the bubble above his head, was looking at all these people, had a scowl on his face, and he says, "Pick a lane, asshole." And the dad was going, you know, I think I may have a problem with road rage here. Have you ever remember the song Cats in the Cradle? My boy grew up just like me. See, our kids will grow up and they'll be just like us, which is great when we're choosing qualities and characteristics that we want them to access. So I always want to go into the evening practicing being that way. And by the way, rebooting right before you go to sleep will actually have you going into sleep without being all stressed and frustrated. I do have a method about how to fall asleep and fall back asleep if you wake up in the middle of the night. If you want me to go over that, I'll be happy to do that. So here is why this works. This is the how of how to make this a habit. If you'll do this every day for 2 to 4 months, at the end of that time period, you will have rewired your brain. Because anything we do creates new neural pathways, and anything we do over and over and over strengthens and makes that the new habit. And here's what we're doing. We're dividing the day into thirds, so we're only practicing for 3 or 4 hours at a time. Keeps us focused. Not trying to do this all week or even all day or all month, just for the morning. And we reboot going into the morning, then we reboot around lunchtime, go into the afternoon purposely, reboot around the drive home or between afternoon and evening, go into the evening, practicing that, reboot right before we go to sleep. Reboot at least 3 to 4 times a day, because each one of those reboots allows us to stop and go into the situation in this more purposeful way. Plus, we are using life's transitions for clarity. Waking up and going into life is a transition. Going from home to work is a transition. Going from morning to afternoon is a transition. Going from afternoon to evening is a transition. Going from one meeting to another is a transition. Going from one room to another is a transition. If we'll start using these times between times for clarity, so we're going into life practicing being this way. See, if I weren't going into my trip to Long Island already in the top of the mind, then when I got triggered, I would have been all the way down to the brainstem. When we go into the top of the mind and we get triggered a little bit, we can shift back up to that top of the mind. But if we go in neutral, or worst case, if we go in worried or stressed or frustrated, it's so easy to kind of get stuck in that lower brain. In other words, it's not just what we feel, but what we feed that creates our experience of life. You may have heard this story about the little boy who was getting into trouble at work, and he was getting into a lot of fights, and his teachers were upset and his parents were upset. And so he went to his grandfather. He's a very wise person. He said, "Hey, grandfather, I don't know what I'm doing, man. I'm getting in all these fights, and I know that you shouldn't get into fights, but there's a part of me that says, don't take any lip, and gosh, I don't know what to do." His grandfather was very wise. He said, I was exactly like you when I was your age. It was almost like I had these 2 dogs inside of me. I had this very friendly dog, and then I had this old mean dog. And the kid's eyes got really wide. He said, yeah, that's exactly it. Which dog won? And he said, well, it depended on the dog I fed. See, we're always feeding 1 or 2 dogs. We're always feeding one part of the brain. If we get caught in this cycle and we are blaming some person or situation for how we're feeling, we're feeding that lower brain. And the more anything we feed, that becomes our experience and our habit. But if we'll choose to feed the best of who we are and practice this and bring it to life and bring it to life, that has us actually feeding this upper 80% of the brain. And we're creating this brand new cycle, this brand new habitual way of being. So I want to give you another map for how to stay in the top of the mind. That's part 2 of my system. I got 3 parts of the system. Number 1, how do you get to the top of the mind? How does the brain work? And that's the brain model. And number 2, how do you stay in the top of the mind? Part 2 is a little bit harder, a little bit more philosophical, but it's designed to fit in with any philosophy you already have, whether it's spiritual or religious or Peter Senge or Stephen Covey or anything you already like, any system or philosophy that you like. This is designed to help you map what part of the brain you're in. So here is the map for part 2. It says the LTM, or life from the top of the mind system, part 2. How do we stay in the clear, confident, creative neocortex? The first thing we have to recognize is every thought, emotion, and action defines who we are, makes a statement about who we are. We need to have some clarity about what that statement looks like. Then we want to turn the problem into the practice field, so we're practicing bringing that to life. We want to make it our highest purpose, the most important thing in life, something I would teach or recommend to someone I love. something that I would be proud to show if someone were following me around with a video camera and my life was going to become a training film for everybody that looked to me for wisdom and advice. Now, of course, the answer to that is no. We're going to stay trapped in that cycle. But if the answer is yes, it is that important. We have access to the 4 criteria. We choose our perspective, our interpretations, our expectations in a very purposeful way. We start in the morning, reboot around lunchtime, reboot on the drive home. All right, here's where putting part 1 and part 2 together. We now know what's going on. I call this a GPS for life. It shows us where we are, where we want to go, and gives us turn-by-turn navigation for how to get there. So now what we do is we're interpreting this. GPS in my system stands for guided perspective shift. A GPS, a guided perspective shift. Because see what we've done, we've shifted our perspective of what this means. No longer does it mean this makes me this. Now we know when we find ourselves in the cycle, we know, hey, I know what's going on. My lower brain is controlling my reactions and limiting my clarity, confidence, and creativity. That's a shift in perspective. That's new awareness. We are now seeing our old reactions not as how we're being made to feel by some person or situation, but really good information about how we're being triggered, about the chemicals that we're triggered, and based on what part of the brain we're in and what part of the brain we need to change is in terms of who's in control. And now we have a model that spells brain in order to do that. Then if we want to stay in the top of the mind, if we want to make this a habit, if we want to rewire the brain in 2 to 4 months, then we go into life clear about who we are, turn the problem into the practice field, make this our highest purpose, choose our perspective, interpretations, expectations in a very powerful way, start in the morning, reboot around lunchtime, reboot on the drive home. Okay, I know I've been giving you a lot of information. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to turn back to either page 6 of the manual or those 3 boxes. Because anything you wrote down there, I want to help you deal with more successfully. So we're about to go to Q&A, and I want to make sure that you know kind of the questions you want to ask. I'll start with this quote from Albert Einstein: problems cannot be solved at the same level of awareness that created them. My goal today was to help you bring new awareness to everything you're talking about, and now I want to show you how to apply it to life. But that's going to require you asking the questions. Remember, you're going to be able to check with your chapter and get the book, because the book has even more information in it. Now I'm going to go to Q&A and stop sharing for while I do that, and answer your questions. How do you want me to help you take this and apply it to life?
Thank you, Bill, for that, wow, in-depth discovery on how to rewire our brains. We do have a couple of questions right off the bat, and of course, anybody else that might have some, please do put them in the chat. So question number 1, what do I do if I get triggered in a meeting or a conversation and I can't stop and go through the 4-4-4 breathing and all that other stuff because people are just staring at me?
That's right, right? I mean, you can't, that's a great question. You can't say, wait a minute, I need to breathe and relax and ask myself 4 questions. You know, that wouldn't work. So there's a couple of things you can do. Number 1, there is a concept called neurolinguistic programming, NLP. And one of the cool things about neurolinguistic programming is it talks about the concept of anchoring. So if you will get really clear, okay, who am I when I'm in the top of the mind? Who am I when I'm calm and creative, kind and influential, in control and empathetic? Just think of that. And then what you want to do is actually kind of anchor that. So squeeze your hands together so that this squeezing of the hands becomes kind of an anchoring of that experience, of that way of being. So that every time you want to do that over and over a couple of times until this is triggering that way of being. Then if you're in the middle of a conversation, you can kind of put your hands together and you can kind of squeeze them a little bit without anybody knowing what you're doing. However, if you get so triggered that you're about to lose it or you just don't have access to your best thoughts, sometimes you have to leave the situation. Now, there is one word that will allow you to leave any situation you're ever in for the rest of your life. And that word is diarrhea. Right? I mean, hey, all right. If you're in the middle of a conversation or a meeting and you had an attack of diarrhea, what would you do? Right? You wouldn't stay there and like crap in your pants, right? You go, I'm sorry, I got to go to the bathroom. And by the way, diarrhea is the perfect excuse to leave any situation you're ever in for the rest of your life. Now, feel free to, but notice what we're doing there. See, here's the thing with being a child. As a child, there are situations that we can't either change or leave. We have to just stay there and take whatever's happening. As an adult, there is no situation we can't either change or leave. We just want to make the excuse to leave in a way that people are okay with. So if I'm having a discussion with someone and I don't want to use the diarrhea or something, I might say, okay, I tell you what, you're making a lot of good points. Could I go check some data? I want to make sure that I'm giving you my best thoughts. Could we talk again in about 30 minutes or maybe this afternoon or tomorrow? In other words, you postpone the conversation so that you can go somewhere and do the brain model. Or if you're talking with your kids, here's a great thing to do. If you're talking with your kids and you lose it, you can say, you know, I just noticed I'm in my lower brain. And what I want to do is to make sure that when we're talking, I'm coming from the best of who I am. Because I know it's my responsibility to kind of teach you guys how to deal with stuff. So I'm going to take a few moments, I'm going to do some deep breathing, and I'm going to shift from my brainstem to the top of the mind. See, what you're doing is really teaching them that they can do that whenever they get triggered, which is really powerful for kids. By the way, I do have a version of this book called College from the Top of the Mind. So it's for college people or high school kids who want to be able to take this material and apply it to life. I also have a YouTube channel that's got about 400 short videos on there. I post one every week. So if you want to go to the channel and look at how I deal with anxiety or COVID-19 or confidence or leadership or core values or parenting or relationships or pretty much any topic, remember I've got 400 of these, then just Google Bill Crawford, PhD, YouTube, and go to the channel and you'll see that. Also, I have a service that's free where each week I send out one of my favorite quotes along with 2 or 3 paragraphs about how to apply that quote. And I put the link to this week's video in the email. So if you would like to receive an email from me where I have one of my favorite quotes along with 2 or 3 paragraphs about how to apply the quote, again, it's free. Just go to my website, billcrawfordphd.com, or just Google Bill Crawford PhD. I'll come up on the first page. Hit the subscribe button. Put your name and email address in there, and each week I'll send you one of my favorite quotes. Other questions? Yeah.
And we do have some more.
Good.
So another one, how does stress turn into tightness in my neck and back?
Great question. So here's the thing. What stress is designed to do is to put us in a situation where we can either fight something or run away from something. So in order to fight something or run away from something, we have to be tense. We can't be just relaxed and then fight or run away something. See, it's just not possible. So the tension in the neck and the back is this middle brain triggering adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol, which tenses up all our muscles so that we can fight or run away from something. But of course, the situation we're dealing with, we can neither fight nor run away, and that's why we find ourselves trapped in the cycle. So breathing and then saying the word, relax. Just kind of, wiggling your shoulders a little bit, kind of just noticing that. Because what you're doing there is you're sending a message from the brain to the muscles to relax. Now remember, that's just the first part of the model, and that will pause the cycle. It won't break the cycle, but it does put you in the top of the mind so you can access that. But that's why stress triggers the tightness in your neck and back, because it thinks we are in a fight or flight situation.
Okay, couple more questions. How soon can I expect to start seeing results from practicing this?
That's a great question. Because, have you noticed like with exercise or when we're learning a new language, how it's kind of hard at the first, especially when we exercise now, we're all sore, but we got to push through the soreness. If you ever learned to play the guitar, you got to push through kind of getting your fingers all sore. So for a lot of things, the learning at the very beginning is hard. The cool thing about this is every time we are accessing the top of the mind, we are actually accessing our best. And we're triggering serotonin and endorphins. Serotonin helps us feel better, and endorphins help us feel better, and serotonin helps us think clear. So you're going to start noticing some positive experience for practicing this almost immediately, if not immediately. The challenge is it won't become a habit unless we're willing to do it every day, because anything we practice over and over and over is what becomes a habit. So we've got to be willing to practice it in order for it to become a habit. But the good news is you should start seeing results immediately. And hey, given that we're going to be on the planet 2 to 4 months later anyway, why not have this be our new habit, right? I mean, wouldn't this be cool if this were just your default position? You just naturally went to this. And that's that rewiring of the brain. So we're creating more neural pathways between the hippocampus and the limbic system and the neocortex, especially the frontal lobes of the neocortex.
Looks like we have one other question. It's a sharing with others. It's a how do we teach? How do we encourage others in our lives to open up to these ideas? Now I see, just so everybody might not have caught it on the chat, Kurt did us the favor of pulling up the link to your website and the subscription link to YouTube. So it's now there for everybody to grab. But yeah, how do we, okay, I suppose we can send them to a crash course on YouTube?
Right. Send them to me. I lay my hands on them. I heal them. I send them back to you. It's all good. It's great that way. No, and by the way, after I answer this question, if you have a question, frankly, you don't really have to put it in chat if you want to. You can just unmute and say, hey, Bill, this is Julie, or this is Ben, or this is whoever. And here's my question. I'll be happy just to kind of actually talk to you. Not a problem. All right, here's the challenge of introducing this to others. Sometimes you got to be careful, because if these other people are like your spouse or your kids, and you say, hey, I learned something that's going to help you deal with stress, they're going to look at you like, oh man, it almost comes across as you really need this, okay? So here's what I would encourage you to do. If you have someone in your life that you think could benefit from this, maybe your spouse, your kids, go to my YouTube channel. See if you can find a YouTube video that you think they will like, and ask them to evaluate it for you. See, when people are evaluating something, they're coming from a different part of the brain. You can say, hey, you know, I saw the seminar the other day, and this guy did a YouTube video. It's only about 5 minutes. Would you kind of give me your best thoughts about it? Would you evaluate it for me? I want to see what you think. And so now they're looking at it going, well, I don't know, is this guy making any sense? Da, 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 da. Now, if you have readers in your family, asking them to evaluate the book would be a really good idea. By the way, the book is now on Audible. About 2 or 3 months ago, I put this on Audible. It took me about 2 or 3 years to do it, because it's really, really hard reading your own stuff. You keep screwed up and you have to go back. But it is now on Audible, so for those of you who like to listen. But if you want to do this, here's another way of making it meaningful in your life. Start practicing it yourself and tell the people around you what you're doing. Tell the people around you, say, you know, I've just noticed in the past, there were some times when I found myself kind of reacting and you know, getting a little bit more stressed and frustrated than I really wanted to be. I've learned some new things about the brain and how to do that differently. So if you see me doing something different in the future, just know that I'm going to be practicing this stuff, and we'll see how it works. Now you're going to have them watching you and looking to you. And as you start doing this differently, they're going to go, hey, this is cool. How do you do that? Now, of course, if you want to, one of the things I've done for an organization called JBM Packaging up north of Cincinnati, I went and did this for their entire plant. They have a 24-hour plant working in 24-hour shifts. So I did this at 4:30 and 11:30 and 4:30 in the morning, 11:30, and then 4:30 in the afternoon to catch all the shifts. I did it for their leadership team, and they have made kind of coming from the top of the mind part of their culture. So obviously that's something that we could do as well. I would certainly love to do that if that's something you would like me to do.
I think we would all agree that every organization that we all belong to could probably benefit from this in one way or another, which is kind of part of helping the human condition, I guess. I guess if anybody else does want to unmute and shoot out a question, I will silence myself.
All right.
Others?
Yeah, just feel free to jump in if you have a question. I know I've given you a lot of information today, okay? I don't expect you to remember all of it. Remember, you should have the link to download the manual, and at the bottom of the manual is my email address. So at that point, anytime you have a question that you don't get answered here, I would encourage you to ask it here, because the cool thing about asking it here is it'll give other people an opportunity to hear the answer. So if you just email me, it'll just be me and you, which is fine. But if you're willing to have the courage to jump in and ask that question, it'll not only, I think, be valuable for you, but be valuable for others. But you will be able to do that. Oh, by the way, while you're thinking of the question, would you like me to show you how to fall asleep and fall back asleep if you happen to wake up in the middle of the night?
Yes, please.
Okay, all right. I do have a YouTube video that goes through this, so if you forget it, just go to my YouTube channel and just search for sleep, and it'll pop up. So here's the problem with falling asleep and trying to fall back asleep when we wake up. Have you noticed when we're trying to do that, our mind is racing? And have you noticed what it's racing with? It's not racing with wonderful, happy, loving thoughts. Have you noticed that? It's racing with something we're worried about or concerned about. Worry or concerns triggers adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol. And remember, those are the wake-up chemicals. Those are the chemicals that are designed to put us into fight or flight. So we're laying there trying to go back to sleep, triggering chemicals that are designed to wake us up. We're laying there triggering the exact same chemicals we would be triggering as if someone were breaking into our house. So that's why that doesn't work. So here's what we want to do. We want to trigger chemicals that are designed to put us back to sleep. So I suggest you use the brain model. You now know what the brain model is. Rather than kind of worrying about whatever you're worrying about, you stop and you breathe and relax, counting to 4, holding it for a count of 4, release for a count of 4, say the word relax on the exhale. You do that until you feel in control and feel centered. May take 2 times, may take 3 times, tops 4. You just do it until you feel centered. Then you want to ask, B-R-A. The A is for ask in the brain model. You want to ask a question that's not about the problem, but about the solution. Not why can't I go to sleep? When will I go to sleep? When will I stop thinking about this stuff? How can I stop my brain from going crazy? But how would I rather be feeling? Okay, if I don't want to be feeling stressed, anxious, frustrated, worried, awake, how would I rather be feeling? Sleepy, drowsy, right? Now remember the lemon. Any image we hold in our mind triggers a chemical change in our body. So B-R-A-I, you imagine a time in your past when you were feeling really sleepy and really drowsy and your head at the pillow and you fell asleep. That triggers melatonin. Melatonin is the chemical that puts us back to sleep. Then you notice the change. B-R-A-I-N, breathe, relax, ask, imagine, notice. At this point in the model, you will be feeling more sleepy, more drowsy. You just repeat the model until you produce enough melatonin to put you back to sleep. But the reason it's working is we're now laying there producing chemicals designed to put us back to sleep versus chemicals designed to wake us up.
I'm getting sleepy right now.
I know, right? You got to be careful. Don't do this when you're driving. But it does work. I've got some great comments on the video. They go, oh my goodness, this really works. I've had, when I do my work with Vistage, I work a lot with Vistage, which is an organization of CEOs. And there is a chair that kind of chairs the group. And the chair will sometimes have me do 3 or 4 presentations in a row. And so the chair will try this, and the next day he'll go, hey, guess what? This works. And again, the reason it works is because we're triggering that melatonin.
So simple.
Yeah, you know, I try to make it accessible. A lot of this stuff I learned when I was getting my PhD, and I didn't want it couched in all of the psychobabble. So I wanted to take the neuropsych and the stuff that I've learned from all of the theories and things that I learned in my PhD and put it in a system. And that's the cool thing about the book. It is a manual for how to do this. It goes through the brain model. It goes through another model. It talks about how to deal with forgiveness. It talks about how to take more responsibility for how we're thinking and feeling so other people aren't triggering us. And the third part of the book actually talks about how to deal with other people. When you're dealing with someone who isn't listening to you or is arguing with you, how do you get them to shift from their resistant brain to their receptive brain so they truly hear and understand what you're wanting them to know? So it's just that we've got to be able to go to the top of the mind and be able to stay there while they're being difficult in order to pull that off. So that's why I like to do part 1 and part 2 before part 3, because we got to get kind of good at being able to be in the top of the mind no matter what they do, no matter what they say, so they're not triggering that lower brain.
Sounds like another chapter.
Could be, you know, we could do this. We could meet again, and I could do all part 3 again if you had folks who wanted to do that. That would be fun for me.
Thank you. Does anybody have any other questions? Chris, do you have anything you want to wrap up? Actually, I think we may have lost Chris. I know he mentioned that he had kids getting off the bus. So
oh, my kid's getting off the bus.
This could be what he's up to right now. He might have shifted into dad mode.
Understand.
So, well, looks like we're getting no more questions, lots of positive comments and thanks. So I want to thank you again, Dr. Bill, for joining us from Houston, and everyone else for setting aside a significant chunk out of your day to come and learn some things to hopefully help us all deal with our modern lives. And I guess we'll be back in touch with all the chapters and see about getting books for those who would like books. And thank you again, everyone.
And thank you for the opportunity. This is so much fun for me. I call this getting paid to do what I would pay to do. So when Lois and Chris and everybody started talking to me about all this, I was going, oh yeah, this is great. Looking forward to this. Hopefully it's been helpful. I wanted to try to give you as much information as possible in a relatively short time. And then you kind of take it and play with it and see how it works. And then let me know if I can be of any assistance in the future. So thanks, Lois, and thanks, Chris, and thanks everybody for the opportunity. This has been a real kick for me. It's been a real pleasure.